Welcome to the Hidden Corners, where truth and terror collide. Discover a realm where the lines between the living and the supernatural blur, as you embark on a journey to the paranormal and visit the mysterious hidden corners of your mind. Good morning, everyone. Clay is in Idaho this week on a fishing trip, lucky guy. And so once again, I'm reading the story for you. Don't be surprised if you hear my rooster hollering in the background. He's being very vocal this morning. I've got the cat purring over here by my computer and the dog snoring. Lots of helpers today. So grab a cup of coffee and sit down and enjoy the story. We are on Book 5 of the Wolfman Chronicles. This is episode 53. And this is Chapter 2, Wolves in the Night. This episode takes place in Alaska. Jack poured himself and Grizzly another glass of whiskey. Everyone's in their rooms and Sasha's making up a bed for you on the sofa. I hope that's okay with you. I'd rather you not go back to the cabin tonight, Grizz. Hell, I haven't had this much excitement in years. Think I'd want to miss anything? Jack laughed. I don't suppose you ever thought you'd have this many people up here at your place. Grizzly lifted his glass to Jack. I never supposed I'd have a whole pack of damn wolves staying up here at my place either, he chuckled. Sasha walked in and put her arms around Grizzly's neck and gave him a kiss on the cheek. Oh, you're just an old softy, Grizz. I've got you figured out. Hey, Jack, pour me one of those. Jack handed her a glass of whiskey on ice. Sasha took a big gulp and felt it burn the back of her throat. She breathed in deeply. How did you find them, anyway? Did they just wander on over to your place? She asked. No, I saw some smoke coming from up here on the ridge and thought I'd better check it out. I could tell it weren't a forest fire, just a slim plume, like from the fireplace. I came up here ready to shoot whoever had broken into the place. There was just something about the girl, reminded me of Sasha. So I just decided to wait a spell and study them a bit. Sat down and thought I'd watch them. Well, damned if I didn't fall asleep, and next thing I know, they're out there in the meadow playing with the dogs. Some guard dogs you have there. So I wandered over and asked them what they were doing. She had her arms around Sheila, and Jilly was licking his face, so I figured they was okay. Thought maybe you knew them and told them to come up here. She told me she was your daughter, and that guy was her boyfriend. So I ended up making them some dinner, and then I just hung around the next couple of days, waiting for y'all to get here. We went fishing, and the dogs were happy to have someone throw the ball for them. I taught them how to play poker, he grumbled. Haven't won a hand yet. Well, we didn't get much of a chance to introduce you to everyone. We'll do that in the morning, Jack said. Does that mean I have to be on my best behavior? Grizzly rolled his eyes at Sasha. She smiled. You have a best behavior? Grizzly snorted, crossing his arms over his chest. I guess you'll have to find out, he muttered, though there was a hint of a grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. Sasha chuckled softly, shaking her head. Well, I'll take my chances. Just don't bring your gun to the table, she replied, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Well, I'm going to bed, you two. She finished off her glass and rinsed it out in the sink. Don't stay up too late. Seriously? I haven't been told not to stay up too late in at least 70 years. He turned to Jack. You put up with this? How can I resist? Jack smiled, kissing Sasha goodnight. I'll be up soon. Once Sasha had left the room, the tone grew more serious. Grizzly, I'm worried about what's going to happen up here once they start sending more of their people. If those two kids really want out, we've got a big fight on our hands. From what I know of the organization, once you're in, the only way to leave is on a slab. So you don't think the Jewel will buy their freedom? Grizzly asked. No, I don't, and they don't either. You could tell by how they were talking. And what do you think about that tracking mechanism they inserted into their arms? It's not just floating around there where it can be cut out. It's stapled right into their bone. Grizzly swirled the whiskey in his drink. I've been a trapper my whole life. Sometimes when a wolf gets his paw stuck in a trap, he'll chew his damn leg off to free himself. I hate to say it, but maybe those two need to lose an arm, at least from the elbow down. That's an awful thought, Jack replied. I think we need to be ready to fight, though. I'm sorry to do this to you, man. I know you're not in the best of condition right now. What do I have to lose? Grizzly interjected. My life? Hell, I'm a dying man. My days are numbered as it is. If I can help those two youngsters free themselves from those Russian bastards, I'll do whatever is in my power. I don't know a lot about the Russian mafia, but I know a bad thing when I see it, and I think this organization sounds like the worst thing I've ever come across. Jack sighed. I was looking for some peace, moving out here to Alaska. I guess that's just not in the cards for me, or for any of us. Now, I'm not a praying man, Grizzly replied, but I think it's about time to get down on our knees and call in some favors. You've done a lot of good in your life, Jack. What's that word y'all like to use now? Karma? Well, it's time to balance those scales a bit, and I'll help every way I can. Jack got up and put his hand on Grizzly's shoulder. Thank you, Grizzly. That means a lot. Hell, I'm not doing it for you, you damn wolf. I'm doing it for that pretty lady of yours up there, Grizzly chuckled. Dark had settled in, and the stars shone brightly in the night sky. The moon was directly overhead and cast its glow down onto the meadow. Sasha could hear Jack softly snoring beside her as she slipped out of bed and put on her robe and slippers. She quietly opened and closed their bedroom door and tiptoed down the stairs through the living room where Grizzly snored loudly on the sofa. As softly as she could, she crossed the living room and went into the kitchen, feeling her way in the dark to the back door. It creaked slightly when she opened it, so she held her breath and paused, but the dogs did not alert. The night air was chilly, a slight breeze ruffling the golden leaves hanging on the aspen trees at the edge of the meadow. Fall is coming early, she thought. Or maybe this is what the 1st of September is always like, here in Alaska. She made her way through the tall grass to the large flat rock at the edge of the meadow, near the path she had recently taken through the forest, the path that now appeared as any other forest path, overgrown with tall dead grass flanking the narrow pathway. Where were the flowers that were so neatly arranged the day she hiked this path with the dogs? It had not looked the same since that strange day when she encountered the child in the long white gown and had been led to that even stranger meadow with the stone altar, the one that neither she nor Jack had been able to find again. She had buried the jewel at the base of the large rock, thinking that, for some unknown reason, it would be safer to keep such a valuable jewel outside of the house. She could tell that Natya and Igor had ruffled through the drawers and cupboards searching for it. She could even tell that they'd checked under her mattress and hadn't quite returned the bed sheets in the same way that she'd always tucked them in. Even the floorboards under the bed had been checked. Dust had settled on either side of fingerprint marks on the wood. Careless, she thought, surprisingly careless. She glanced toward the big house, making sure no one was watching out a window. She saw no movement inside, the house dark and gloomy at night. She took a small hand spade out of her pocket and began digging in the dirt at the base of the flat rock, in the exact spot where she knew she had buried the jewel only a couple of weeks earlier. Though she dug deeper than she expected to, still she did not find the bag with the jewel hidden inside. She glanced around. Was there another rock nearby that she had somehow mistaken this rock for? No, it had to be this rock. It was the only flat rock, and she distinctly remembered the exact shape of the rock she had chosen. She began to dig a couple of inches to either side of the original hole, but there was nothing. Panic began to settle in as she realized the bag simply was not there. How could it be gone? Had Nadia and Igor somehow located it? That was unlikely, and even though it was quite dark, Sasha could tell the ground had not recently been turned. Did Jack take it? Why would he do something like that and not tell her? She sat back on the cold earth and ran the entire scenario over in her mind. She saw herself walking to this exact rock, digging the hole just deep enough to put the bag inside, and covering it with dirt, patting it down firmly, then covering it with grass and leaves so it would look like no one had touched it. Did I dream I buried it? She wondered. No, I am 100% sure I buried it right here. She could feel her heart racing. If she didn't have the jewel, what would she do? What would she say to Nadia? That she lost it? She could feel herself beginning to shake, and once again she looked all around, thinking she must be at the wrong rock. Though there were rocks all around the meadow, none of them were flat, with the slight bowl indentation that filled with water when it rained. She remembered the day she had found the path lined with flowers. The rock was near the beginning of that path and had a lovely small pool of water, like a bird bath or a fairy pool. On that day there were flowers surrounding the rock, and she remembered thinking how beautiful it was. She had chosen that spot to bury the jewel because she thought it was the perfect place for such a beautiful jewel to be hidden. Could it be that someone had been watching her? The little girl in the long white gown, maybe? So many strange things had happened that day. She gasped, "Am I losing my mind?" Part of her wanted to run in and wake Jack, ask him if he had taken the jewel. Could it have been Grizzly? He'd had plenty of time to nose around the place while they were in Mexico. Her mind was racing now. She frantically began to dig again, deeper and wider this time, throwing dirt over her shoulder and digging with both hands in the hard dirt, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to scream. One of the twins was crying, which meant the other one would join in soon. Catherine reached over to wake Usko, who was sound asleep beside her. "I guess it's my turn anyway," she grumbled, as he rolled over and pulled the pillow over his head. "I think I would give anything for a good night's sleep," she told herself, as she got up and put her robe on. "It's too cold in here," she thought, as she crossed the room to the crib, where the babies were crying, curled up together like young pups do. They were growing too fast. It was impossible to keep them in clothes. They should be babies still, Kat thought as she looked down at the toddlers. She picked one up, and then the other, returning to her bed to tuck them in between Usko and herself. They liked the closeness and would sleep better. Then maybe she could get some sleep herself. As she was crossing back to the bed with the twins in each arm, she caught a glimpse of movement outside. Walking closer to the window to see what had caught her eye, she saw a figure bent down on the ground at the far edge of the open meadow. "Is that Sasha?" she wondered. The figure was definitely a woman, and she seemed to be kneeling down in front of the large rock that reflected the moon's light. What is she doing out there this time of night? Catherine wondered. She walked to the bed and put the twins in next to Usko. She thought about waking him, but then decided not to. Better to have him in bed where the twins could cuddle with him. After tucking them in, she walked back to the window and watched as Sasha rocked back and forth, clutching her arms around her, and from this angle looked to be crying. How strange, Catherine thought. You would think she'd be happy her daughter is here. It made her feel uncomfortable, like she was spying. Something is not right about this, any of this, she decided. Her daughter just showing up out of nowhere with some guy that no one knows and a cock and bull story about being some kind of highly trained assassin for the Russian government. At what, 16? I don't believe her, and I don't trust her, she decided. I'm not sure I can even trust Sasha. She's lied to Jack before. Why is he so certain she's not lying to him still? I've got to be on my guard, now more than ever. No one is going to hurt my children. No one. She turned from the window and got back into bed, the twins cuddled in between she and her husband. But as the hours wore on, she stared at the ceiling, eyes wide open, unable to sleep, her mind wandering to all kinds of scenarios where her children were in harm's way. She glanced at Usko. How can he sleep when there are strangers in the house? How can he sleep when our children are in danger? And why would my brother put us in this predicament? He is so damn careless. And Julian and Juanita, they're so caught up in their own little world, they wouldn't even notice if we were attacked in our sleep. And who is this old man, Grizzly? Maybe he is in on this whole thing. Why was he sitting with the two Russians playing cards? He must be in on it too. We aren't safe. I can't fall asleep. I must stay awake and protect my children. Miguel slept soundly for the better part of the night, but a couple of whiskeys before bed, and now his bladder was screaming at him. He stumbled to the bathroom and braced himself with one hand against the wall in front of him, only partially awake. What was that sound? He wondered. Did I just hear singing? I must be dreaming. He staggered back to bed and was about to climb back under the covers when he heard it again. He sat on the edge of the bed, listening intently. There! Again! It was a woman's voice, the sweetest and clearest sound he had ever heard. It sounded like it was coming from outside. He stood and paused for a moment, telling himself it was only his imagination. No, there it is again, singing. He walked to the window and parted the curtains. The moon was barely peeking through the trees, and the forest and meadow were enclosed in darkness. What was that? Out of the corner of his eye, he thought he caught a movement in the trees. Yet, when he looked straight at it, he saw nothing. He turned his head slightly. There it is again. But he strained his eyes looking into the trees and saw nothing. It's the whiskey, he thought, as he turned to get back into bed. But just as he turned, he heard the singing again. Slowly, he turned back toward the window, and there, faintly glowing against the dark background of forest, was a woman. She was tall, slender, with long flowing hair and wearing a long, loose robe. He could see her clearly now. It's as if she glowed, radiating light. As she sang, the light seemed to pulsate around her, and when she stopped, the glow slowly faded. He opened the window and felt the cool night air rush in. She was standing far across the open meadow, yet he could tell she was looking straight at him. She opened her mouth and began to sing again, and he watched as the light glowed through her and around her, as if her voice made the light dance around her and within her. It was hypnotizing to watch, and her voice was absolutely captivating. Was she beckoning to him? She raised her arm, her hand, and motioned for him to come, to follow her. He was mesmerized. Who is this woman? He grabbed his jeans from where he had draped them over the chair and threw on a sweatshirt. He carried his boots down the hall, careful not to wake any of the slumbering household. As he stepped out onto the porch, he saw her, waiting for him. She motioned for him to follow her as he stepped into his boots. She is so beautiful, he thought, as he stepped through the tall, dry meadow grass headed toward the trees. She turned and began walking on a path that led through the forest, with Miguel following along behind her. She's barefoot, he noticed as the distance between them grew shorter. As the first light of dawn began to creep into the small room downstairs, Nadia knew their time was up. They couldn't stay here any longer, not with the organization closing in. She turned to Igor, who was just waking. "We have to move," she said. "You need to get up now. We need to leave." Igor nodded, rubbing the sleep out of his eyes. "Come on," Nadia urged him. As they gathered the few items they had brought with them, Nadia's mind raced. They needed to get to the safe house and check in. There had been no way to communicate with Vitya from the house. There was no cell reception that far in the wilderness. She knew that if they didn't check in, Vitya would be sending reinforcements out to find out why. They had to buy themselves some time. "But we don't have the jewel," Igor complained. "Not yet, we don't. But we need Vitya to know we are communicating with Sasha, that she has promised to give it to us. I don't know, we can make it up as we go. But if we don't check in this morning, there will be others here by this afternoon. I can guarantee it." "Are you going to say anything to Sasha before we go? Maybe she'll give us the jewel." "I'm just going to leave her a note. I'll tell her that we had to check in at the safe house and contact our handler in order to buy us some time. We can figure out the details when we get back. I figure if we leave now, we can be in Fairbanks in a couple of hours and do our check-in. Then we'll come back out here and figure out our next move." "It just doesn't make sense," Igor said. "Come on," she whispered forcefully. But as they stepped outside, the cold air hitting their faces like a slap, Nadia wasn't sure it was the right thing to do. Something didn't feel right. She scanned the trees, her hand moving instinctively to the weapon holstered at her side. And then she saw it, a flash of movement, barely visible in the pre-dawn light. Her heart skipped a beat. They weren't alone. "Get down!" she shouted, pushing Igor aside. "What?" Igor said. "There's nothing here. Listen." Both of them stood motionless, listening to the deep silence of the forest. "I thought I saw something. Someone. Over there, through the trees. Just ahead," Nadia explained. "I've never known you to be jumpy, Nadia. You're better than this," Igor complained as he began walking ahead. "No, don't take the road. There's a path right over there, through the trees. It looks like it parallels the road. It'll be safer." Nadia pointed to the narrow path that clearly led through the trees, several feet away from the dirt road. It was darker in the forest. The morning sun had not yet risen, and the trees were large and dense, not letting any of the pre-dawn light filter through. But the path was clear and easy to follow. "The sun should be up by now. I wonder why it's still so dark in here," Nadia commented as she glanced around. It must be the light playing tricks, but it seemed to be getting darker instead of lighter. "Nadia, I know this is going to sound strange, but I think we're traveling in a circle. See that tree just ahead? The one that's forked over that big rock? Almost like the rock is splitting the roots of the tree in half. I could swear we already walked by that tree once before." "Nonsense. This path is straight as can be, and you can make out the road right over there, through those trees. It's absolutely parallel to the road. You must have just seen another tree that looked similar to this one," Nadia explained. "You're probably right," Igor said, "but maybe we should walk on the road now that we're away from the house." "Are you crazy? It's too dangerous. What if they've already sent someone? Let's just get to our car and lead them away from here." They continued to walk another half an hour. "We should be near our car now. Start watching for it," Nadia said as she checked the distance they had walked on her wrist phone. There was no cell reception, of course, but the watch could still monitor things such as steps and distance and direction. "We're still heading east," she mentioned, as if to assure Igor that they were indeed still heading in the correct direction. "Wait a minute," Igor said. "Look, there's that tree again, the forked tree over the rock. I swear that's the same tree. Igor, it can't be. I've checked my watch several times. We've been heading east the entire walk. There is no way we're walking in circles. Okay, wait a minute. He took a handkerchief out of his backpack and walked over to the oddly deformed tree. He tied the piece of fabric to one of the low branches, just at eye level. Just to be sure, he commented. After a good half an hour of walking and searching for their vehicle, with Natia closely watching the directional arrow on her wrist phone, they both felt a chill when up ahead they saw the tree with Igor's handkerchief tied to the branch. What the hell is going on here? Igor said. Natia felt dizzy. This just didn't make sense. How could they possibly have gone in circles? What's that noise? Nadia gasped. Igor looked around quickly. It was laughter, or at least something that sounded like laughter. It's just a bird, I'm sure, Igor said. I've heard about a bird, a kookaburra or something like that. It sounds like it's laughing. They live in Australia, not Alaska, Natia hissed. Suddenly, a small figure darted across the trail in front of them. Natia grabbed her gun. Did you see that? What? Igor replied. I didn't see anything. The laughter continued. It sounds like children's laughter. Maybe we've somehow circled back to the house and we can hear the two little kids laughing, Natia replied. Natia and Igor slowly turned as several children started appearing, all laughing and darting through the trees as if they were playing hide-and-seek. All the children were wearing long white gowns and darted so quickly you couldn't quite make out their faces. Hello? Nadia called out. Can you help us? Have you seen our car? The largest of the children stopped running and stepped out from the tree it was hiding behind. Was it a boy? A girl? The face seemed blurred at first, but appeared to be slowly coming into focus as it stepped closer. The face was very pale, almost a translucent white, with very large, dark eyes. As it moved closer and closer, it opened its mouth to speak, revealing sharp, pointed little teeth in a gruesome smile. It opened its mouth wider, wider, wider still, and let out a blood-curdling scream. Natia and Igor both raised their hands to their ears to drown out the noise, but all the other children chimed in, and the noise was too much to bear. They felt themselves falling into unconsciousness. As the first day of September dawned in Circle, Alaska, the night had grown crisp and a thin veil of frost clung to the ground, hinting at the inevitable arrival of winter. Rosa was up before the sun, making homemade tortillas, cutting fruit, and preparing huevos rancheros. She was pleased with the layout of the kitchen in the big log home. A woman designed this kitchen, she thought as she rummaged through the drawers, finding utensils and serving bowls that looked as though they'd never been used. I can't believe I'm really in Alaska, she mused as she gazed out the window at the dark expanse of forest that stretched as far as the eye could see. It's so uniquely different from Mexico, so strange and wild, and she couldn't quite find the right word to describe it. She had often visited the Tarahumara Indians in the Copper Canyon and had been awestruck at the rugged Sierra Madre mountain range. Now the towering mountains of the Sierra Madre seemed modest in comparison to Alaska's immense snow-capped peaks that pierced the sky. The endless stretches of untouched wilderness were unlike anything she could have ever imagined. The air was crisp and biting, a stark contrast to the familiar warmth of Mexico. The light here was different too, more piercing, almost otherworldly, and seemed to illuminate every rock and tree with a clarity that sharpened the senses. It's like the forest doesn't just surround you, it engulfs you, making you feel small and insignificant, she decided as she stared out the window at the rising sun. She could hear Grizzly stirring in the living room and poured him a cup of coffee. She carried it out and stood looking down at him as he opened his eyes, startled and sleepy-eyed. Jack woke at the break of dawn to the smell of coffee brewing in the kitchen. Rosa was an early riser and made a point of always having coffee ready in the pot before anyone else in the house had risen. Jack felt bad about not stopping by the market before coming to the house. They had the essentials there, coffee, flour, and sugar, maybe even some milk. He remembered leaving some meat in the freezer before they left for Mexico, but any perishables were eaten before they left or given to Grizzly. He had planned on stopping by the little market in Circle and picking up supplies. He liked to buy things there, support the little store, rather than picking up supplies in Fairbanks. He made a mental note to run over there as soon as they opened, so Rosa would have eggs and produce and the things she would need for the kitchen. Sasha was sound asleep, so he left her peacefully slumbering and walked downstairs to the kitchen. Rosa was busy frying freshly made tortillas and squeezing fresh oranges for mimosas. She had bowls of fruit already cut and all the makings for huevos rancheros laid out on the counter, ready to assemble as soon as everyone was up. "Where'd all the food come from?" Jack asked, stealing a hot tortilla from the plate. She shooed him away, and he took his cup of coffee and wandered into the living room. Grizzly was sitting on the sofa, sipping a cup of hot coffee. "Morning, Grizz," Jack said. "I can't tell you how nice it is to have a good woman bring you a cup of coffee first thing in the morning. That's one of life's pleasures I sure do miss," Grizzly replied. "Just opened my eyes and saw this beautiful Mexican woman standing over me with a cup of hot coffee. I thought I was died and gone to heaven. I don't know what I said, but she threatened to pour it over my head." Jack laughed. "You gotta watch Rosa. She'll dish it right back at you." "A woman after my own heart," Grizzly replied. "Hey, thanks for picking up the supplies. I was going to stop at the market in town, but it got too late last night. Rosa would have been mighty mad if she couldn't fix breakfast for everyone." "What are you talking about? I didn't bring no groceries. The last couple of days, those 2 Russian kids were eating crackers and tuna fish. That's about all you had in them cupboards. Your liquor cabinet's way better stocked than your larder." "Well, she's got oranges and all kinds of fruit in there. Eggs and milk, green chilies, and who knows what all else. Well, maybe they brought it with them. Strange, though. Miguel mentioned last night that we better get to the store as soon as they open so Rosa will have her supplies. Seems strange you would have said that if they'd brought it." "Well, don't look a gift horse in the mouth," Grizzly said. "Where is everyone?" Sasha asked as she walked into the living room. "Still asleep, I suppose," Jack replied. Sasha looked worried. "Julian and Juanita are coming down now, and Catherine and Usko are getting the twins dressed. But Miguel's room is empty, and so is Natia and Igor's room." "Did you ask Rosa? She was up early. She might have seen them," Jack replied. Rosa walked out of the kitchen, her hands on her hips. "I'm not serving breakfast until everyone is seated." "Miguel and Natia and Igor are not here. Did you see them this morning, Rosa?" Sasha asked. "No, and I was up at the break of dawn. Did they leave in the night?" A flash of fear crossed Sasha's face. Jack got up and put his arm around her. "Don't worry. I'll take the dogs and look around outside. They'll pick up the scent if they've left the house." "Be careful, Jack," Sasha replied. Miguel woke with a start. His head throbbed as he sat up, feeling the damp earth beneath him. "Where am I?" was the first thought in his mind. "And how much whiskey did I drink last night? And where the hell are my clothes?" The forest was alive with the sounds of morning, birds chirping in the trees, and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. There was a chill to the air, and yet he wasn't particularly cold. He blinked hard, trying to piece together fragments of memory. The mysterious woman's enchanting voice, her beautiful long hair, the gleam of her eyes in the moonlight, and something else lurking just at the edges of his mind. He stood and looked around, searching for his clothes and his boots. He felt an inexplicable need to laugh. He pictured himself walking back to Jack and Sasha's, stark naked, with some crazy story about following a woman into the forest and losing his clothes and boots. The more he thought about it, the funnier it seemed, and he laughed until his stomach ached. Crap, I don't even know which direction Jack's house is. What the hell was I thinking, going out in the middle of the night and getting myself lost? And I sure don't relish the idea of walking out of here barefoot. He vaguely recalled reading a story once about an enchantress that led a love-struck man into the forest and threw his clothes up into a tree. He looked up, and sure enough, his clothes were tied in knots around the branch of a nearby tree, just out of reach. His boots were sitting on the branch beside his clothes. He laughed again. Funny, very funny. You expect me to climb up this tree, naked, to gather my clothes and boots? Whoever you are, you're probably watching how ridiculous this all looks, he said out loud, although no one was there. He looked around for a rock or something he could stand on to reach his clothing. There were plenty of rocks, but none that would give him the extra boost of height he needed. But he found a few large rocks he could use to throw at his boots, and after several tries, he was able to knock them out of the tree. Now that he had his boots on, he was able to walk around the forest and find a fallen log that was large enough to stand on so he could untie his clothing from the branches. Okay, you've had your fun. Now lead me the hell out of here, he said out loud, as if there were someone there. There was no reply. He looked both ways, up the trail and down the trail, and figured he'd just pick one. He had a 50-50 chance of heading the right direction, and he hoped he'd pick up his tracks from the night before. He figured the stream would be leading down to the river, so instead he followed it upstream, thinking that he'd eventually get to the ridge and be able to locate Jack's house. After several minutes of walking, the path veered off from the stream and opened up into a large clearing. As he approached the meadow, he saw that it was large and circular in shape. He could see the ridge from here, so he walked into the meadow a bit further to get his bearings. There were large boulders in the middle of the clearing, and he thought if he climbed up on the largest boulder, he might be able to see Jack's house on the ridge. As he neared the rocks, he noticed they were laid out in a large circle, and there was something laying on the middle of the largest flat boulder. As he got closer, he suddenly realized they were people laying on the boulder. A chill ran through his body. Are they asleep, or are they dead? He yelled out, "Hello there!" and quickly approached the rocks. What he saw made his blood turn cold. It was Natia and Igor, spread out upon the rocks, and they weren't moving. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Werewolf Chronicles. I hope you'll join us next week as we read more of the story. Till then, have a great week, everyone.